2003, I came to a Wednesday night service that we were having at New Testament Fellowship. At the time, I was dating Nate, and he knew that I was a Christian. I'd read my Bible in front of him. I'd never prayed out loud in front of him. I'd never asked him to pray. I'd asked him to come to church some, and he would sometimes come with me, for me, not for him. And I had come on a Wednesday night, and after church, Pastor Bobby saw me. Everyone was leaving, and Pastor Bobby saw me and called me up, and he just said, "Hey, I just feel like the Lord's got a gift he wants to give you." And he said, "I need somebody to pray over you." And looked around and saw Julie Mann standing there and said, "Hey, Julie, will you pray over her? You know, God's got something he wants to give her." And without any discussion, she said okay and prayed over me. And I felt the Lord telling me that I needed to go over and pray for my boyfriend, who's now my husband, Nate. He'd been having trouble with his wrist and his back for at least a year. He lived right down the street from the church, so I didn't have that long to argue with God, even though I did on the way over there. I was scared to death. I knew that he was at home playing games and probably smoking weed.
Yeah, I was definitely stoned.
If I wasn't there, he was
yeah,
stoned. That was kind of our
it.
understanding, is that I didn't want to be around it, I didn't want to see it, but I would overlook it if we could come to that understanding.
Yeah.
So that's why I wasn't going to go over, because I knew already that that's what was going to be happening. So
yeah, that was pretty much it. But I mean, you know, my wrist had been hurting me. I don't really know how long it actually, or when it started hurting me. I know it probably about 6 to 8 months. It was really into like the excruciating zone where it was like, you know, this hurts and something needs to be done about it. And my back was giving me some problems too. And I was working construction, doing awnings. So, you know, there's a lot of up and down ladder with heavy stuff and using power tools, hammer drills and stuff like that. And I just couldn't use my left hand at all. My boss at the time sent me to a chiropractor. The first time I went in, I got him to check out my wrist, do an x-ray of it. And he did an x-ray and told me that I had a bone spur, like right in here somewhere, and a displaced carpal, and that was probably what it was. And he'd do my back adjustments, and then right before I leave, he'd grab my wrist and he'd do some crazy stuff and then pop it. And it would feel good for like 20 minutes, but that was it. I mean, my back, it was helping out a little more, but the wrist, it wasn't really doing anything for. And so I was also in a band, and we were pretty much playing shows every weekend. And it was, whenever she come over, that was in December of '05. So sometime in November, I'd end up telling everybody else in the band, I was like, look, you know, we had a show booked for New Year's Eve, and that was the last show we had booked. And I was like, we're not going to book any more shows after we play this last show on New Year's Eve, that I'm going to go see a doctor and, you know, get something seriously done about this. Because it was at the point where I wasn't playing guitar at all unless I was at practice or at a show. And when I would literally be almost in tears. I mean, I had good days and bad days, but for the most part, like, I could not bend my wrist back at all, any pressure on it. And like no mobility with it really at all. So Maleesa comes over that night, she called me up and just comes in and she says, I want to pray for your wrist and back. And I'm just sitting there, and she, you know, prayed. And like she said, it was the first time she'd ever prayed out loud in front of me. But I mean, I'd always believed in God, and I went to Pentecostal church a little bit when I was a kid, so it wasn't like a foreign idea to me. And it didn't freak me out or nothing, but I just wasn't living, you know, at that time. So she prayed for me, and she leaves. It was like a drive-by prayer, you know, she was just in and out. And after she left, I'm just sitting there doing my thing again. I probably smoked another blunt or something, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, my wrist really ain't hurting. But I was like, maybe I'm just really high or something, you know. So I go to bed, and I wake up the next morning, and the pain's just gone. And I was like, that is awesome. I was like, thank you, Jesus. You know, I called her up, told her, and I mean, I think she was probably crying. I know I was probably crying, I don't really remember, but that was a couple weeks before Christmas that year. And you know, I mean, my back also was done, and this is 6 years later, and neither one of them hurt me anymore at all. But I was still, you know, it wasn't like everything just falls off right away. So it wasn't really that long after that. It was New Year's Eve when I quit smoking weed that year. That last show that we played, I remember I had a big fat blunt, and I smoked it right by myself in front of all my friends. I said that was it, and that was December 31st, '05, and that was the last time I touched that stuff. Since then, like, I've just, fallen in love with Jesus more every day. But, it's been a steady climb. I remember Will called me up out of the blue one day. Y'all were, Harvest was advertising for guitar players. Didn't really want to do it, wasn't my style of music. And Will called me up and was like, hey man, I know you play guitar. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, I seen you down at
The
some
Legion.
rock summit show that we played at the Legion or some bunch of bands. And if God hadn't healed my wrist, then I wouldn't be playing guitar and I wouldn't be on the worship team. And that's the gift God has given me, is the ability to play music. And that was something I even acknowledged before I was saved, that was my God-given gift, was playing guitar. And I mean, there's really just no words to express how grateful I am for that. And if he hadn't healed me, then that would have been over. Because I mean, if I would have got surgery, there ain't no telling what might have happened. I might have had less mobility out of my wrist than before the surgery, even with no pain.
Yeah.
So there's just, I mean, God's the only one that can really heal it. So.